The void between stars is never truly silent. There's the constant, low thrum of the Odyssey's engines, a vibration felt in the bones more than heard. There's the hum of life support, the faint crackle of the comms, the occasional beep from a navigation console. It's a symphony of machinery that lulls you into a sense of companionship. That's why the sudden, screeching burst of static from the deep space array was so violently jarring. It ripped through the ship's calm like a scream in a cathedral. Captain Valeria Rostova was at the command console in an instant, her weariness shed like a coat. Her fingers danced across the screen, filtering out the noise, pulling the signal from the chaos. It was a distress beacon, weak and fragmented, chewed up by its long journey through the dark. ... Olympus Colony ... Cetus 77 ... total systems failure. The voice was a distorted digital ghost, but the panic in its tone was horrifically real. Dr. Eris Thorne looked up from his biological samples, his scientific curiosity instantly piqued. Engineer Ben Carter emerged from a service conduit, a grease-smudged wrench in his hand, his face already pale. Specialist Lena Cato, who had been monitoring comms, swiveled in her chair, her usually serene expression tight with alarm. ... Can't hear it, but it's everywhere. The silence. It's in the... Shh. The transmission ended, not with a click, but with a final agonized shriek of static that then collapsed into absolute dead air. The bridge was silent. The four of them looked at each other, the unspoken question hanging in the recycled atmosphere. What does that mean? It's in the silence. Rostova's voice was tight, all business. Cato, trace the point of origin. Carter, plot a course, maximum burn. She turned to Thorne. Doctor, you're with me. A mining colony of 200 people doesn't just go silent. The journey to the CD system was tense. The Odyssey was a hauler, not a warship. Her hull was thick, but her weapons were non-existent. They were a lifeline, rushing toward a mystery that felt less like a rescue and more like a descent. When the blue-green marble of Cetus 77 finally filled the main view screen, the first wave of dread hit. Olympus Colony was visible from orbit, a neat arrangement of domes and structures nestled in a vast red rock canyon. Everything was perfectly intact. No fire, no blast craters, no signs of conflict. Olympus Colony, this is Deep Space Hauler Odyssey. Please respond. Rostova's calm was met with nothing, not even the hiss of an open channel. Cato, broad spectrum scan. Look for anything. Energy signatures, comm traffic, movement. Lena Cato's hands flew across her panel, her brow furrowed in concentration. Nothing, Captain. No signals. Life support is nominal. Power is on, but I'm reading 0 life signs. It's empty. The shuttle ride down was a quiet affair. The usual pre-mission banter was absent, replaced by the roar of atmospheric entry and the weight of the unknown. Carter piloted them with a white-knuckled grip, following the beacon that was still, inexplicably, pinging away. The shuttle settled onto the dusty landing pad with a soft thud. Through the viewport, the colony looked like a model, perfectly still, perfectly clean. They suited up, the clicks of their helmet seals echoing loudly in the cramped cabin. The wrap lowered with a hydraulic hiss. And then it hit them. The silence. It wasn't just the absence of human noise. It was the absence of all noise. There was no wind, though the flags on the landing pad hung limp. There were no calls of native animals, no buzz of insects. The colony's machinery was running, but it was eerily, impossibly quiet. The hum of generators, the whisper of air processors, all of it was gone, swallowed by a profound, suffocating stillness. It was the silence of a tomb that had been meticulously maintained, waiting for them to enter. The silence was a physical weight, pressing against their helmets, against their minds. Captain Rostova took the first step off the ramp, her boot sinking into the fine red dust of Cetus 77 with a crunch that was absurdly loud in the void. She raised her pulse rifle, not aiming at anything, but at the emptiness itself. Behind her, Dr. Thorne adjusted the sensor pack on his shoulder, his eyes wide with a morbid fascination. Engineer Ben Carter emerged from a service conduit, his own rifle trembling slightly as he scanned the 2 still structures. Specialist Lena Cato, who had been monitoring comms, swiveled in her chair, her usually serene expression tight with alarm.
Engineer Carter brought up the rear, his own rifle trembling slightly as he scanned the two still structures. Specialist Cato followed, her head cocked as if straining to hear a frequency just beyond reach. They moved toward the main habitation dome, a large geodesic structure of plastisteel and reinforced glass. The entrance hatch was sealed. Carter found the manual override, his gloved fingers fumbling with the keypad. With a soft pneumatic sigh, the hatch slid open. The silence from within was deeper, more intimate. It was the silence of an interrupted life. The first thing they saw was the cafeteria. Tables were set. Half-eaten meals sat on trays, the food desiccated and fossilized under the relentless, climate-controlled air. Cups of coffee were spilled, their contents long since dried into dark stains on the synthetic floor. It was a snapshot of a moment, frozen in time. Then they saw the people. They were still sitting at the tables, slumped over their meals or fallen back in their chairs. They weren't decomposed. The sterile environment had seen to that. They were mummified, preserved in a grotesque parody of their last moments. And on every single face, without exception, was the same expression. Eyes were wide, impossibly so, the white shot through with burst capillaries. Mouths were stretched open in a final, soundless scream of pure, unadulterated terror. It was a gallery of identical frozen shrieks. "My God," Carter whispered, his voice a hoarse crackle over the comms. He stumbled back, bumping into a chair. The sound was like a gunshot. Rostov's jaw was clenched so tight it ached. "Thorne, do your work. Cato, sweep for any active data logs, security feeds, anything. Carter, with me. We check the other sections." But Carter couldn't move. He was rooted to the spot, staring at a young woman collapsed near the serving line, her hand still clutching a metal serving spoon. Her face was a mask of utter horror. "What could do this?" he breathed. "There's no blood, no wounds. They just died of fright?" "Move, engineer," Rostova commanded, her voice harsh to mask her own revulsion. She pushed past him, leading the way out of the nightmare gallery and into the main corridor. The story was the same everywhere. Bodies in the corridors, fallen where they ran. Bodies in the control room, collapsed over their consoles. A maintenance worker, half inside an open access panel. Two people curled together in a futile attempt to find comfort, all of them wearing the same terrible mask of their final second. The colony was a museum of death, and the exhibit was always the same. In the med bay, they found a more organized scene. Several bodies were on gurneys, and a doctor in a white coat was sprawled on the floor with a hypo spray still in her hand. It was here that Thorne set up his mobile lab. With Rostova's help, he lifted one of the bodies onto a sterile table. It was light, brittle. "Commander, I need to perform an examination," he said, his voice clinical, detached. It was his armor against the horror. Rostova nodded, standing guard at the door, her back to him. She didn't need to see. She could hear it. The soft crackle of the sterile field, the hum of his scanners, and then the sound she'd been dreading. The wet, precise snip of bone shears and the gentle crack of a skull being opened. Thorne was silent for a long time. The only sound was the faint whir of his tools. "Impossible," he muttered, more to himself than her. "Report, doctor," Rostova said, her eyes fixed on the empty corridor. "The cause of death is unequivocal and catastrophic," he began, his voice losing its clinical edge and gaining a note of awe. "Massive, simultaneous brain hemorrhaging. The cerebral cortex is pulped. It looks like the neural tissue was subjected to a tremendous concussive force, and the auditory cortex is specifically targeted. It's been utterly shredded."
"An explosion? A pressure wave?" Rostova asked, turning to look at him. He was staring into the open cranium, his face pale under his helmet visor. "No," he said, looking up at her, his eyes wide with a terrible wonder.
No, Captain. There's no physical trauma to the body, no damage to the surrounding environment. An explosion would have left evidence. This is precise, surgical almost. It's as if a sound wave of unimaginable power was tuned to resonate specifically with the human brain. It passed through everything else and only affected them. Meanwhile, in the command center, Lena Cato had managed to bypass the security lockouts. The colony's mainframe was intact, its last logs preserved. She scrolled through reams of data, environmental controls, mineral output reports, routine messages. Then she found the final entries. The logs became frantic, disjointed. Log, Colony Medical Officer. Headaches are universal. Migraines, reports of tinnitus. No source. Scans show nothing. Log, Colony Chief Engineer. Audio sensors are picking up a persistent, low-frequency vibration. Source is external, geological, we think. It's below our hearing threshold. Amplitude is increasing. Log, Colony Administrator. People are scared. Carter says his teeth hurt. Jenkins collapsed in the mess. Just started screaming before he stopped. The final log entry was audio only. It was the voice of the administrator, but it was choked with panic, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "It's not in the noise. It's in the silence between the notes. Can you hear it? You have to listen for what's not there. It's in the..." The recording ended. Cato played it again, her skin crawling. She enhanced the background audio, filtering out the man's voice. And there it was, a constant, deep, rhythmic thrum, a vibration so low it was more a feeling than a sound, a silent scream. Back in the medbay, Engineer Carter leaned against a wall, rubbing his temples through his helmet. "This place is giving me a hell of a headache," he grumbled. "Feels like pressure right behind my eyes." Dr. Thorne and Captain Rostova exchanged a look of dawning icy dread. The headache wasn't just a headache anymore. It was a drill, a persistent, agonizing pressure boring into the space behind Carter's eyes. He squeezed his temples, the smooth surface of his helmet offering no relief. "It's getting worse," he groaned, his voice tight with pain over the comms. "It's like a vibration inside my skull." Dr. Thorne was already moving, his scientific detachment replaced by urgent concern. He pulled a handheld scanner from his pack, its faint blue light washing over Carter's helmeted head. The readings flickered, and Dr. Thorne's face, visible through his visor, went pale. "Neural activity is spiking. There's minor swelling. It's a milder version of what I saw in the colonists. Captain, he's being affected." The theory formed in his mind, then cold and horrifying in its simplicity. He turned from Carter to the rest of the team, his words tumbling out in a rushed, awed torrent. "The sound, the infrasound Cato found. We've been thinking about this all wrong. It's not a byproduct, it's a weapon, a perfectly evolved defense mechanism." He gestured wildly toward the canyon walls, visible through the viewport. "Those crystalline formations, they aren't just rocks. They're a life form, a sessile, silicon-based colony organism. They communicate, they sense their environment through resonant vibration. And our presence, our machinery, our heartbeats, we're static. We're noise on their frequency. So they emit this pulse, this targeted infrasound rifle shot to clear the interference." Rostova stared at him, trying to process the enormity of it. "A sound that kills you? A sound you can't even hear?" "Not a sound," Torn corrected, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and excitement. "A vibration. It bypasses the eardrum entirely. It resonates directly with the human brain tissue itself. It doesn't need to be loud to us. It just needs to be the right frequency to turn our minds to pulp. The colonists didn't die of fright, Captain. They died because a fundamental physical force was tuned to liquefy their consciousness. They never heard a thing. As if on cue, a low moan began outside. It was the wind, finally stirring after the eternal stillness. It was a gentle breeze at first, sighing through the Red Rock Canyon. But on Cato's enhanced audio panel, the gentle sigh became a roaring avalanche of data. Her eyes widened in sheer terror. "The readings," she stammered, her fingers flying across the console. "Captain, the wind, it's interacting with the formations. It's like a bow being drawn across a violin string. The amplitude is increasing exponentially. The entire canyon is starting to resonate." The gentle breeze was now a steady wind, whistling softly past the habitation dome. To them, it was just wind. But in the realm of the unheard, it was a chorus of death. The silent scream was building to a crescendo, and they were standing in the middle of the orchestra. Carter let out a sharp cry and stumbled back, clutching his head. "Stop! Make it stop! Can't you hear that?" he screamed, his voice cracking with panic. The rest of the team froze. They heard nothing but the wind.
"Hear what, Ben?" Cato asked, her voice soft with dawning horror. "What do you hear?" It's a ringing, a high-pitched tone. It's inside my head. It's scraping inside my skull." He was hyperventilating now, his breath's ragged sobs over the comms. The initial exposure near the rock face had primed him, made him marginally more sensitive. He was their canary in the coal mine, and he was dying. His behavior became erratic. He started swatting at his helmet as if trying to dislodge a bug. He would whirl around, aiming his rifle at empty corners, convinced he was hearing movement. Whispers. "They're talking to me. The rocks. They're screaming. Can't you hear them screaming?" Rostova tried to approach him, her hands up. "Carter, it's not real. It's an auditory hallucination. Your brain is trying to interpret a frequency it can't process. Fight it." But he was beyond reason. The silent scream was all he could hear now, a phantom noise that was tearing his sanity apart. He backed away from her, toward the main airlock. "I have to get out. It's too loud in here. The walls are singing. I have to let it out." "Ben, no!" Cato shouted. It was too late. His eyes were wild, unseeing, focused on some internal horror. His hands, fumbling with a madman's strength, found the manual override for the inner airlock door. The rest of the team was too far away, too shocked to react in time. The door hissed open. Carter stumbled into the airlock chamber. "Carter, stand down!" Rostova roared, sprinting toward him, but the inner door slammed shut in her face. She pounded on the reinforced glass. Inside, Carter was frantically clawing at his helmet's release latch. "Too loud," he sobbed, his face a grotesque mask of terror and agony, a horrifying echo of the colonists they had found. "Have to make it stop." With a final desperate twist, he broke the seal. The sound of the atmosphere equalizing was a violent, shocking roar after the long silence. But it only lasted a second. The team watched, utterly helpless, as the unseen force hit him. His body didn't fly apart. He simply seized. His eyes rolled back into his head, and his limbs contorted in a violent, unnatural spasm. His mouth opened in a final, genuine scream that was utterly silent, lost in the thin atmosphere and the wind's howl. Then he collapsed, his body slumping against the outer door, his face freezing into the same perfect, wide-eyed expression of absolute, mind-annihilating terror that was the calling card of Olympus Colony. The wind continued to blow outside. The silent scream continued its unheard song. And now, there were 4. The wind's mournful howl outside was no longer just weather. It was a death rattle. Inside the command center, the silence was even heavier, thick with the ghost of Carter's final silent scream.
The three survivors stood frozen, staring through the viewport at his body, now just another exhibit in the colony's gallery of horrors. The initial shock curdled into a cold, sharp fear. They were not investigators anymore. They were prey. Captain Rostova was the first to break the paralytic silence. Her voice was a low, strained command, all emotion ruthlessly suppressed. "Torn, barricade that door. Use anything. Cato, I need a forecast. How long until this storm passes?" Cato's fingers flew across the environmental console, but her hands were shaking. "The storm system is massive, Captain. It's settled over the canyon. We're looking at a minimum of 12 hours, possibly a full day." Her voice hitched. "And the resonance. Captain, it's not just continuing. It's evolving." She turned her screen toward them. The audio waveform display, which had shown a consistent, brutal pulse, was now changing. The pulses were becoming more complex, layering over each other, shifting in frequency. It's reacting," Cato whispered, her eyes wide with a terror that went beyond the physical. "The wind patterns are different. It's learning, adapting. It's composing a new symphony just for us." The truth of their situation crashed down upon them. They were trapped in a sealed box, and the box was being shaken by an unseen, intelligent force that wanted to scrape their minds clean. Every gust of wind was another verse in the song that killed a colony. Thorn finished shoving a heavy console against the main door, his face ashen. "It's a siege. We can't stay here. The longer we remain, the more tuned to us that frequency becomes. Carter was just the beginning. Our brain patterns are the new static it's trying to eliminate." "Then we run," Rostova stated, her mind already calculating the odds. "We make a break for the shuttle. It's 100 meters across the open landing pad. And get our brains scrambled the second we step outside?" Thorn countered, a note of desperation in his voice. "We heard what it did to Carter through his open helmet. Our suits might dampen it, but for how long? That frequency is intensifying. It would be suicide." Cato, who had been staring at the audio readouts, spoke without looking up. Her voice was quiet, almost dreamy. "Noise." Rostova and Thorn turned to her. "What was that, Specialist?" "Noise," Cato repeated, looking up. A faint trickle of blood had seeped from her left nostril, staining her upper lip. She seemed unaware of it. "It uses vibration. So do we. What's the biggest source of vibration we have?" Thorn's eyes widened as he followed her train of thought. "The reactor. The colony's primary fusion reactor." "Exactly," Cato said, a strange, feverish light in her eyes. "We trigger an overload. Not enough to breach containment, but enough to force an emergency venting, a controlled explosion, a single massive shockwave of real, audible noise. It would be a hammer blow right through their precise, resonant frequency. It would disrupt their signal, scramble it." Rostova's mind raced. "It would give us a window, a few seconds of chaos in the unseen spectrum. We run during the bang." It was insane. It was brilliant. It was their only chance. Setting the overload is a manual job. The safety protocols are deep in the reactor control room. Someone has to go down there, bypass the locks, and initiate the sequence, and then outrun it. The unspoken words hung in the air. It was a suicide mission. "I'll do it," Rostova said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "That's an order. You two get to the airlock and be ready to run on my mark." Thorn opened his mouth to protest, but a sharp look from her silenced him. She was the captain. This was her duty. The journey to the reactor level was a descent into a deeper circle of hell. The corridors were darker here, the silence more profound, broken only by the frantic rhythm of her own breathing inside her helmet. Every shadow seemed to hold a frozen corpse. She moved with a predator's grace, her pulse rifle held tight, her eyes constantly scanning. She reached the heavy reinforced door of the reactor control room. The manual override bell was stiff, but it turned with a groan. Inside, the room was dominated by the thrum of the massive fusion core behind thick leaded glass. The sound was a comforting human noise in the midst of the alien silence. She worked quickly, her training taking over. She bypassed the safety protocols, her fingers flying across the console. Warnings flashed red on the screens. Critical overload imminent. Containment breach risk. She ignored them, setting the timer for 3 minutes. Time enough for her to get clear. Maybe. A sudden, violent gust of wind outside screamed against the compound, and on its tail, a wave of pressure hit her. It was a physical force, a silent punch to the head. Her vision blurred at the edges. A sharp, hot pain lanced through her temples. The silent scream was finding her, its new frequency piercing their defenses. She stumbled, clutching the console for support. Blood began to drip from her nose, spattering darkly on the white control panel. She fought through the agony and putting the final commands. The timer began its countdown. 2:59, 2:58. She turned and ran. The corridor seemed to stretch infinitely before her. The thrum of the reactor faded behind her, replaced by a high-pitched whine that was in the air, or inside her own disintegrating mind. She could feel the vibration in her teeth and her bones. She rounded the final corner. The airlock was ahead. Through the viewport, she could see Thorn and Cato, their faces pressed to the glass, eyes wide with fear and hope. A tremendous groaning shudder ran through the entire structure. The lights flickered and died, replaced by the strobing red emergency beacons. A deep building roar began to grow from the depths of the outpost below her. The hammer was about to fall. She slammed her hand against the airlock outer door control. Nothing. The power was fluctuating. With a final desperate surge of strength, she grabbed the manual release wheel. The roar of the reactor was now a deafening scream, even through the walls. The disruption had begun. She looked at her crew through the glass and gave them a single, sharp nod. It was time to run.
The manual release wheel turned with a shriek of protesting metal. Every ounce of Captain Rostova's strength went into it, her muscles burning, her vision swimming from the pressure building inside her skull. Behind her, the deep building roar of the reactor overload was becoming the only sound in the universe, a blessed, terrible noise that drowned out the silent screams scraping at her mind. With a final brutal heave, the mechanism gave way. The outer airlock door slid open just enough for a person to slip through. "Go! Now!" she screamed into the comms, her voice raw and breaking. Thorn didn't hesitate. He grabbed Cato's arm and shoved them both through the narrow gap, stumbling out onto the landing pad. The wind immediately tore at them, howling its silent death song. They turned, expecting Rostova to be right behind them. She wasn't. She stood just inside the airlock, her body braced against the inner door, holding it open against the failing hydraulics. The strobing red emergency lights painted her face in flashes of crimson. Blood now flowed freely from her nose and ears, tracing dark lines down her neck. "Rostova!" Thorn yelled, taking a step back toward her. Her eyes met his through the viewports. There was no fear in them, only a fierce, final determination. She shook her head, a sharp, painful movement. "The door will seal shut if I let go," she gasped, her voice crackling with strain and static. "Run! That's an order." The roar from the reactor reached a crescendo. Then the world turned white and sound. The shockwave wasn't a sound. It was a physical force. It hit them like a wall, throwing Thorn and Cato to the ground. The very air vibrated with a single colossal thump of pure, undiluted noise that obliterated every other sensation. For 1, 2, 3 precious seconds, the silent scream was gone, utterly vanquished by the human-made cataclysm. Scrambling to their feet, ears ringing, they didn't look back, they ran. Their boots pounded on the dusty permacrete, a frantic rhythmic drumbeat against the dying echo of the explosion. The shuttle was ahead, a symbol of salvation. They didn't dare stop. They didn't dare listen for the silence they knew would return. Thorn hit the hatch control, and they tumbled inside, collapsing onto the deck as the door sealed behind them. The shuttle's interior was a sanctuary of familiar human sounds, the hum of power, the beep of systems. Thorn lunged for the pilot's seat, his hands executing the launch sequence with robotic efficiency. The engines whined to life. As the shuttle lifted off, Thorn allowed himself one look down at Olympus Colony.
A plume of smoke and dust billowed from the reactor vent. The storm was already beginning to clear, the winds calming. The colony itself was silent and still once more. A graveyard returned to perfect, horrifying peace. They had escaped. His breath escaped in a ragged sob of relief. He turned to Kato, who was slumped against a bulkhead. "Lena, we made it. We're clear." She didn't answer. She didn't even look at him. She was staring straight ahead at the metal wall, her eyes wide and unblinking. She was perfectly still, perfectly silent. A single, fresh trickle of blood seeped from her ear and traced a slow, dark path down her neck. Thorne's relief curdled into ice. He reached for her, his hand shaking. "Kato?" She flinched at his touch, a tiny involuntary spasm, but her gaze never wavered. This silent scream hadn't killed her, but it had done something worse. It had stayed. It was now a permanent, echoing ghost in the cathedral of her mind, a terrible, vacant silence. Alone, Thorne guided the shuttle into the black. The silence in the cabin was deafening. He opened a wideband channel, his voice a hollow, broken thing. "This is Dr. Eris Thorne of the DSV Odyssey. Olympus Colony on CD-77 is lost. Do not approach. Do not attempt a rescue. There is no enemy to fight, no sound to hear." He took a shuddering breath, the faint, persistent ringing in his own ears a terrifying question. "The scream you don't hear is the one that kills you. Stay away." He cut the transmission. The only sound was the hum of the ship and the silent, screaming silence between the stars. He was alone with it, and he knew in his heart that a part of it was now alone with him.